Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Hello and welcome to At the Controls with Jonathan Ledgard and Mark Gallagher, the podcast which draws inspiration from Formula One, the people, the cars, the technology and the positive philosophy that underpins the sport. And if you revel in great achievements on the track, then Lewis Hamilton's performance in matching Michael Schumacher's extraordinary record of 91 Grand Prix wins would surely have struck a chord, even more so after Michael's son Mick presented the current Mercedes driver with one of Michael's race helmets. Mark, that was a very moving gesture, surely. It clearly touched Hamilton on a landmark day for the sport.
Yes, and this is a tough sport. Sometimes it can be really brutal, but central to it is this intense human endeavour that we see every weekend, people striving to be their best. So to see Mick present that helmet reminded us of the flow of talent that we have seen, Jonathan, over the years, the talent that comes through Formula One from one generation to the next. And I think for many of us watching that moment, we could really see it as a passing of the baton of greatness from Michael to Lewis. And in my eyes, anyway, both men stand shoulder to shoulder with the greats of every era of Formula One. But it was just a lovely moment to witness.
And a special tweet from Michael's official Twitter feed as well. As Michael used to say, they said, records are there to be broken. Well, Mark and I have been talking to a man who worked with Lewis Hamilton for 10 years, both at McLaren and Mercedes. Paddy Lowe was technical director at McLaren and then executive director at Mercedes, seeing close up what has made Hamilton the preeminent driver of his generation. We'll also be talking to a British Formula One driver who'd love to follow in Hamilton's wheel tracks to the top. His name, Lando Norris, currently starring for McLaren, but also a driving force in eSports and the virtual Formula One Grand Prix series, developed during lockdown by Formula One's digital business and eSports head, Julian Tan, who's also a really interesting guest this month. But before we hear from Paddy Lowe, Mark, a question for you. Did you ever expect anyone to come close to equaling Michael Schumacher's record of wins? Really? Really?
Yeah, well, thing is, I do remember a time when none of us thought that Juan Manuel Fangio's record of 5 World Championship titles would be broken. I remember back in the 80s, that used to be a topic in the paddock, and particularly when the likes of Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna failed to match his tally of championship wins, in the 1980s and 90s. But then along came Michael Schumacher and Ferrari. And now we have Lewis and Mercedes. And I think, Lewis is the supreme driver of this era. So while it's a fact that today's cars are inherently reliable when compared with those of the past, plus drivers have more than 20 opportunities to win each year as opposed to the 10, 12, 14 or 16 races a year that we had in the past. There's no doubt Lewis is the one driver to have really made the most of the technology that we have today. So in some ways, actually, Jonathan, I think it's a testimony to Michael's achievements a decade and a half ago that it has actually taken this long for anyone to match his tally of race wins. But a superb achievement by Lewis. And ultimately, we're just seeing progress. It's just an inexorable progress of great people, great teams, and a great talent like Lewis.
There's a great quote by Daniel Ricciardo on Twitter saying 91 races is nearly 5 years' worth of races. That puts it in perspective how much success Lewis has had. To do it week in, week out, and year on year to keep showing that level of consistency at the front is not easy. It is a magnificent achievement, you have to say. Whether you like Lewis Hamilton or not, you surely got to tip your hat to him. And for many of his race wins since his debut with McLaren in 2007, Hamilton was working with Paddy Lowe until Paddy left Mercedes in 2017. He was there, for example, when Hamilton made his dramatic entry into Formula One and has watched him scale these remarkable heights. So, did Paddy ever think a driver would match Schumacher's achievement?
I didn't really think about it. I remember during the Schumacher era, he did a fantastic job, but it did go on a bit. And I remember finding it, rather dull, and quite a few other Formula One fans thought the same. So I never thought, would we repeat it? I think we are in a new era now. There are more races per season, and we've seen quite a lot of changes in the structure of Formula One, which gives certain teams more dominance and consistency than others. So I think it was inevitable at some point that we would see a similar thing. And I think it's probably going to happen again. Lewis, terrific driver, arguably the best driver in F1 history. Certainly, he's right up there. But, there will be more great drivers in the many years to come.
That's fascinating. I won't ask you to look into your crystal ball because we don't know who's coming. Maybe it'll be Max Verstappen. But let's focus on Lewis, because you were with him right from the word go in terms of him coming into McLaren in 2007, and you were with him also at Mercedes as well. What makes him the force that he is?
I think Lewis is, firstly, he's immensely talented. He's got terrific control of a car. What I put technically is control bandwidth. So, he can move the steering wheel, react very, very fast, and that allows him to drive a car closer to the limit more often. So that's one aspect. That's the control of the car, and I've seen that, in all the great drivers, and we saw that from day one with Lewis at McLaren. And then on top of that, he's a fantastic racer. He absolutely understands how to race, how to overtake, where to position his car. He races very, very hard, but very, very fairly. He's a great sportsman. And I think the other factor actually is endurance. Drivers, for one reason or another, can be many reasons, have not so often stayed consistently in the same team or in the same winning car for many, many years and made that work. And Lewis has been incredibly loyal, incredibly consistent. Part of that is relationship building, for instance, many other factors that have kept him motivated and working with the best team and the best technology to be there and deliver the results.
Fascinated to hear, but I'm fascinated to hear you said at 2007, when he first came in, you noticed it straight away. He had that bandwidth. He knew exactly what to do. That's really impressive, isn't it, for someone who comes straight into Formula One in his first few races? Phenomenal.
That's an inbuilt talent that he probably had from very, very young. The ability to react, how quickly you see drivers in the car from the onboard, when the car has what we call a moment, where the rear steps out and you have to react on the steering to correct that. That's a control action in response to a disturbance. You have to react very, very fast to that. The faster you can react, detect that disturbance and react to it, the quicker you can go. So that's in machinery terms, that's a control task. And Lewis is right up there with the greats in terms of that ability. One of my references for that would be Nigel Mansell, his incredible car control. We saw many great examples in his career.
Paddy, do you think that people underestimate how much it takes out of someone to win the World Championship? Because I think with Lewis, people are saying, oh, well, it's a little bit tedious. It's like Michael Schumacher era. They just keep winning every weekend. And yet the effort required to do so is immense, which is one of the reasons why some drivers just burn out like a firework pretty quickly.
That's absolutely correct. You hear a lot of chat about, well, he's in the best car, this and that. Apart from the point of beating your teammate, which is really obvious, there's the other point of staying consistent, staying motivated. Just the sheer workload of achieving 91 victories is a feat in itself.
What about his relationships with teammates? Because going back to 2007, that momentous year, but there, Hamilton up against Fernando Alonso, and the way he was able to take him on and beat him. And he's been up against Jenson Button. He's been up against Nico Rosberg. How does he work with these people? How does he draw people to him? How does he respond? How does he react in briefings and then obviously on the track?
Yeah, Lewis, like any other driver, he always wants to beat his teammate. I don't think he's particularly friendly with his teammates. In my experience, they very rarely are. At the same time, being very respectful. He's always a sportsman, not only to his teammate, but to all the other drivers. But yeah, always strong. First season he came in case we forget, he was on the podium for his first 9 races. So now you talked about, will we see things again? Will we see greats again, such as Schumacher and Hamilton, which I think we will. But I think we're very unlikely to see that type of rookie delivery, 9 podiums in your first 9 races, is actually an incredible achievement. In some ways, a greater achievement, more notable than the 91 races.
It was phenomenal. But I also wonder about 2016 and how much you mentioned there, Nico Rosberg, no disrespect, as you said, because he said something very interesting in the aftermath of the Eiffel Grand Prix in terms of what Bottas was trying to do. And he said, you have to be perfect. So how did Lewis react, I suppose, to not being perfect and losing that championship to 2016? Is that part of the motivation, do you think, the drive which has kicked him on for 17, 18, 19 and more than likely 20 as well?
Yeah, I thought that was a very significant moment in Lewis's career. You know, none of us are perfect. Let's just say that. And whilst Lewis is an absolutely amazing driver, a unique driver, of course he has his weaknesses. But I saw a turning point at the end of 2016 where he closed down one of those weaknesses in a very significant way. He lost in 2016 against Nico. Nico is an absolutely terrific driver, you know, very, very deserving of that championship, actually. The best match, I would say, that Lewis has seen, and that was the result. But I think the thing Lewis learned from that was that he needed to be absolutely consistent and leave nothing to chance at all. Up to that time, he'd been a little bit reliant on his talent, and with the odd race where, you know, you could tell it wasn't quite 100% in the game. And what I've seen since he lost to Nico in 2016 is that he leaves nothing on the table at all at any race, and that's really made him unbeatable.
Now, Paddy, you mentioned Nigel Mansell earlier on. I was actually delighted to hear you mention him in the same sentence as Lewis, that kind of raw determination and then the car control that he had. But that takes us back to your early years at Williams. And of course, recently the sport has seen the departure of Sir Frank Williams after a long and stellar career in the sport. Talk to us about your arrival into Formula One with Williams and the early experience of working in the setup there with Frank and Patrick Head.
Yeah, it was a very interesting period for me. I started at Williams at the end of 1987. They were just closing off a championship, and I was brought in by Frank Durney, actually, to work on the active suspension system. So I was a young engineer. My specialism was control engineering. It's difficult to understand now, but back then you didn't have the internet. Information was not freely available. So, you know, you couldn't Google and say, you know, what's going on at Williams, who does what. There was, you know, very, very little information. And on top of that, to be honest, I wasn't a massive Formula One fan. I loved cars, motorbikes, engines. I would watch racing of any sort if it happened to pass me by. But I wasn't a deep follower. So I didn't really know the names, and I arrived very, very fresh and not really understanding what was going on. But it was a fascinating period. And, you know, I learned a lot in a very little length of time.
Paddy, a lot of people still talk about the active suspension with a sense of awe. Were you sorry to see all of that hard work cast aside with a change in regulations and just how, I mean, it's worth perhaps for our younger listeners just to explain how fascinating that technology was and what it did for a Formula One car?
Yeah, it was a bit like the Wild West back then because teams were very small. We were about 100 people at Williams. And, you know, of those, only 20 or so engineers, let's say. And the rule book was quite thin. So Formula One was behind the curve in terms of technology relative to the opportunity in the rule book. So we were just moving into electronics, and we started putting computers on the car to control systems. And that was really in its infancy. And we pioneered all of that. And we were able to do things like active suspension. That was a hydraulic platform controlled by a computer that would manage the ride height of the car according to different aspects of the track. And mainly that gave you a huge aerodynamic advantage. But we would also come in and invent things like traction control. So you'd literally, you know, sit in the bath and go, you know, we could do that. What would that take? And you'd come in the next day and start work and possibly deliver it within just a few weeks. The rule book didn't stop you. And by the time we got that together, it was 1992 when we launched the Williams FW14B with active suspension and with traction control. And this wasn't present on any other car. We had brought in Adrian Newey, who was very strong in aerodynamics, and people were expecting, as now for somebody to come in and beat Mercedes would be considered, firstly, unlikely, and B, a huge overturn. We did the same with McLaren. And I remember the first race in Kyalami 92 when we were quicker than in practice. And there hadn't been any testing, by the way, before the season, so nobody knew. It was all a great unravelling. And the first session, we couldn't actually believe that we were quicker than McLaren. It just seemed impossible. But it came true. We got pole position. We won the race in a very dominant manner. And a lot of it was down to those, all the elements I mentioned, but the active suspension particularly and the traction control were worth a second a lap each. And that really, made the difference. We were typically 2 seconds a lap quicker than anyone else.
Yeah, it was a fantastic year, and Nigel Mansell would say aye to that. Just picking up your point about having an idea in the bath, you think, wow, let's do this. Do you feel now that the rule book, the Formula One rule book, is too restrictive, that those great inspirations that you or Adrian Newey or Patrick Head or Frank Durney, whichever designer you'd like to mention, John Barnard, do you feel the rule book is now way too restrictive? Is that a huge frustration?
Yeah, I mentioned that. So in those days, we were behind the curve in terms of the rule book. That probably turned over around about year 2000, and it's become the exact opposite, where the rule book is the constraint. And, if you can find any little opportunity in the rules, then the actual delivery into that opportunity is relatively easy with the resources that the teams have available. Yes, in the old days, we didn't have the science really to understand what would definitely deliver lap time. It came from, a sense. And some of those names you mentioned had a great sense for where they would find lap time. Whereas now it's about very, very disciplined engineering, large teams with very, very sophisticated tools, but working still with a huge degree of innovation.
Paddy, when you look at the broad sweep of your career, over 30 years in the sport, as well as I do, the topics that people spend lots of time talking about, the rules, the regulations, the technology, the business side of Formula One. But whenever you take a step back from it all and look at the big picture, what's been your big takeaways about Formula One and what it is that really makes the difference for teams that want to go out and win?
I mean, we have to remember that Formula One is a sport, it's an entertainment, and I think whilst the technology can be incredibly exciting and certainly from my side and for the engineers involved, extremely rewarding. Just to give some flavour for that, just imagine if you come up with something, and then 2 or 3 weeks later it's on the car and helping you win a race. That's an incredible feeling, when those purple sectors tick up for the first qualifying with your new gadget. Can you imagine the pleasure at that? So, but that's quite a private pleasure.
I'm not an engineer, Paddy.
Yeah. So, purple actually is a really, I like purple. It's a very nice color, because to those of your listeners not familiar, the Formula One timesheet, all those numbers that you see on engineers and pit wall screens, there are different colors, and when a sector time pops up, the best color to see is purple, because that means you've set the fastest time in that sector. 3 purples for 3 sectors is the result you want to see in qualifying. Anyway, but that's a very private pleasure. In the end, Formula One is a huge sport internationally, and it's about the entertainment, it's about the emotions around competition, excitement, and this is why the drivers ultimately are much more popular than the engineers. And I think but the balance I like to see is that Formula One is a 50-50 between the machinery and the drivers. And generally that is the case, and that's what makes it extremely exciting.
So how did you reset after leaving Williams and Formula One? And how do you replace that buzz? Instead of seeing purples on a computer screen, purple, purple, purple for the three sectors, how do you replace that? And how do you get the same sort of buzz, as you might say, or a different buzz from what you're doing now, which is much more involved in new energy, should we say?
Yeah, it's different, actually. And I think back and I do miss that. And I'm not saying I won't do it again either, by the way.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But on the other hand, I'm doing some very, very fascinating things at the moment, and I, get a lot of pleasure from that. I've actually had a chance to think about things, think about bigger pictures, widen your horizons, widen your perspectives, and look at some of the important things.
And what are those important things then, Paddy? What are you working on at the moment you can tell us, which is seemingly inspiring you for a new project?
One of the things, and this isn't all I'm doing, but one of them is around energy. Now, this might be surprising, but I'm going to say, because I only worked this out about a year ago, some people may be horrified and so how didn't you know that? But do you understand that CO2 in the atmosphere, which is causing global warming, that every bit of CO2 that you and I put up there throughout our lifetimes is still up there in effect? Even the CO2 that Stephenson's rocket put up there from burning coal is still up there, and that's the problem. So because we think in normal life about, things tend to dissipate, that, if you make a mess somewhere, it generally sort of fades away after a while. The shocking thing about CO2 in the atmosphere is it just accumulates. There are other gases that go out there that can cause global warming, but they break down. Now, combine that also with the point that, ever since we grew up, there's been, this story of oil running out, and now, the more recent decade, it's, well, it won't run out because we keep finding more. I saw this program the other day, and they're talking about those deep gorges you get in Arizona. You've seen on all the Western movies how deep they are, and they represent 1 billion years of erosion, and a foot of that is 100,000 years, and all human history is 1 inch. So we're tiny in timescale. And they will look back on this period as, the Industrial Revolution, the great transformation of human society. But the way I look at it, this can only be a transitionary period because we're just a speck and we're consuming all of these resources in a linear manner. But yeah, petroleum is actually a terrific substance, and it's actually all around us. The irony at the moment is it's a bad word, loaded with all sorts of very, very bad connotations now. And yet, ironically, we're addicted to it, not only in energy, but in all the products, pharmaceuticals. We've been making PPE like mad this year for good reason, but it all comes from petroleum sources. The thing we've got to do as a human race is invent a way to have it both ways. Can we produce these materials, energy and hydrocarbon feedstocks, in a circular way rather than a linear way, so that we can go on effectively indefinitely? And that is actually all achievable. We just need to get on with it. Formula One is a great example of one of those linear consumers. I think it needs to change that and find a way to set a path into this more circular process. And one of the interesting aspects to it is that what I'm talking about requires an industrial approach. Bio sources, bioenergy, biochemicals are a direction that people are turning, and it's a very interesting direction. But it's when you actually stand back, it's fraught also with problems. We already are stressing nature massively, and we have a shortage of land, so there's a lot of conflict around that. So the idea that you can correct or supply all of this consumption again using nature is just not realistic. It doesn't scale in the way we need. We have an industrial society, and we need industrial solutions to that, and they can be built. wind farms, solar farms, now I'm happy to say more and more embraced. They used to be seen as something not in my backyard, but actually I think people are more and more understanding that that's what goes with modern life, and that's things like that we have to scale to a huge extent, much more than we have today. So Formula One can play its part in setting that path, and that's what we've got to do. Not only a technical task, it's a communications task.
It's rare to hear a Formula One technical director, surely, Mark, talking on a subject or about a subject which offers such a challenge to a sport that's become such a target and is an easy target for environmental campaigners. And when you think, for example, of the Honda exit, how that they decided to go for environmental sustainable technologies, they're looking to do that themselves. There is a huge world out there which Paddy Lowe is drawing attention to, which I think is striking a chord with many in the Formula One paddock now, surely. There's a new movement evolving.
Yeah, no question about it. Actually, when you think about the big thinkers that we have in the sport, and there's no doubt that Paddy Lowe is one of those, very, very smart people who have spent their entire lives immersed in innovation. And it's pretty well impossible, unless you've been hiding in a cave somewhere, not to understand that we face some pretty big environmental challenges at the moment, and it is going to require a lot of innovation in order to develop the solutions that need to happen, the kind of solutions that David Attenborough and his ilk really want to see scientists come up with to save the environment. And I think, to your point, when you think about the campaigning that Lewis Hamilton has been doing about environmental issues, whether it's been the forest fires in Australia, where he donated $1 million to the causes around the forest fires last year, whether it's the fact that he is promoting veganism and, moving away from a meat-eating culture, which, we all know is one of the contributing factors to some of the environmental problems that we're seeing. And then you also, I'm sure some of the listeners will have heard Sebastian Vettel's interview on the official F1 podcast, in which he talked about sustainable farming and the environment. And you're thinking, actually, all of these bright people at the top of our sport are very concerned about similar things. So to hear a scientist like Paddy talking about this doesn't really come as a surprise. It underlines the amount of thought that's going into plotting a way forward. And I really, again, to your point about Honda, I think the sport is just at the key moment now where it needs to make the right moves going forward. Instead of Honda running away from Formula One, I wish they'd stayed in and played a part in helping to frame the regulations that could actually see some great environmental technologies being developed through Formula One. I would love to see the bright people in Formula One apply all of their brain cells to the kind of technologies that could really revolutionize transport and mobility in the future, and I do fear that might not happen. So it depends what the likes of Pat Simmons and Ross Brawn come up with over the course of the next 18 months. But great to hear Paddy talking about his enthusiasm for it and the fact that he hasn't given up on working back in Formula One. So let's hope he does both, come back into Formula One and help us to develop some really cool technologies.
Maybe with those two you just mentioned, Ross Brawn and Pat Simmons, but also just another point he mentioned, he thinks that 91 races or whatever the total that Lewis Hamilton will eventually stop at will be broken. That is an extraordinary statement to make, I think, given where we are at the moment. But maybe, as Michael Schumacher said, records are there to be broken, but there's a long way to go for the likes of Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, surely.
Jonathan, it's going to happen again unless Formula One's powers that be find an answer to the conundrum of one team running away with a given set of regulations and perfecting a car such that the top driver will dominate for a 5, 6 or 7 year period. Essentially, that's what happened in the Schumacher era. It has happened certainly in the Hamilton era. And you could argue that the Vettel era was similarly, that Red Bull wasn't quite the dominance that we've seen with Mercedes, but that Red Bull era of 2010 to 13 was 4 years of the Milton Keynes team at the front of Formula One. As long as those eras continue, there is the prospect that someone else will come along, and another Lewis Hamilton, in terms of talent and capability, and given the right car, will just run away with the ball again. So it comes down to the powers that be, the regulators, the FIA, and the technical team at Formula One itself to come up with some way of mixing things up. And it would be nice to think that maybe Hamilton and Schumacher's records will stand forever, because Formula One finds a way to make itself truly unpredictable in terms of its outcomes. But I'm afraid at the moment I don't hold up much hope for that.
Let's see. You're listening to Mark Gallagher and Jonathan Ledyard and the podcast At the Controls. We've still got to hear from Lando Norris on how gaming has helped him develop as a driver and continues to have a big influence on his career. But before we hear his take on the rise of esports, Mark, you've been talking to the Formula One executive whose role is overseeing this new empire.
Yes, well, we used to refer to it as video or computer games, and it's caused many a parent, including in the Gallagher household, I can tell you, to bemoan the hours spent by children and young adults on a console online. But there's no doubt esports has been a fast developing industry over the last decade. And now, in this year of COVID and lockdown, it's really accelerated. It's taken centre stage in Formula One, thanks to real racing being stopped back in March and virtual racing taking over. Now, Dr. Julian Tan, who you mentioned earlier on, Jonathan, he's head of digital business initiatives at eSports at Formula One and has been the man responsible for Formula One's eSports journey since 2017. Now, interestingly, he's Malaysian. He's an Oxford graduate who completed a doctorate in composites engineering, of all things, at Cambridge University. He should be designing cars, I think. But anyway, before he then went on to study business management at Harvard, joined Boston Consulting Group, one of the big consulting businesses in the world. And then from there, he joined Formula One. And I started by asking him about his experience of leading the esports charge within Formula One.
My journey within Formula One has been really fast paced, no pun intended. We're really excited about the future that esports can continue to deliver to Formula One as a sport beyond the obvious elements around being a, further fan engagement tool or a new media asset. There's so many more things we can continue to unlock with this completely new asset.
Now, because you, just reversing up a little bit, because you did your PhD in composites engineering, I'm fascinated to know, do you give a sideways glance to the Formula One cars and give a nod to the fact that you know a thing or two about composites technology?
The short answer is yes. I mean, every time I see a Formula One car, it takes me back to my time when I was a PhD student experimenting on carbon fiber laminates. An interesting story actually was, so after I finished my PhD and moved into the world of business, when I was working at BCG, obviously all of my projects were very different from my time at BCG. But when I had joined Formula One and entered the office for the first time, I always remember going up the staircase, and the handrails on the staircase in the Formula One office is made out of carbon fiber. And I felt, I've come full circle now. I did my PhD in carbon fiber laminates, and now I'm working at Formula One. And this is probably the closest I've been in years to carbon fiber laminates. I know a great deal about the material and its properties. I think in some ways it's quite beautiful. How I've kind of found my way back to where I kind of started.
Now, tell me this, whenever you joined Liberty coming across from Boston, obviously this was in the formative stages of what is effectively the new era of Formula One, the post-Bernie Ecclestone era of Formula One. And from an esports perspective, well, it simply didn't exist in Formula One before then. Do you think that has given you an advantage? Because essentially you're starting with a clean sheet of paper.
Yeah, I mean, when we entered esports in 2017, as an industry, it was still relatively new, I would say, in kind of the more mainstream terms. I mean, as an industry that's long existed and has experienced tremendous growth, which caught our attention as a business and as a sport. But for us, and I think more generally for what I would maybe call non-endemic brands or new leagues sort of considering esports as a potential avenue, was still relatively new, and not a lot, I would say, had been done in that space. So I think one of the great things that we have had, to your point about having an advantage, is that because we're starting on sort of early on in that journey, we are not just creating an esports presence, we're also defining the direction of an industry. And particularly with a brand like Formula One, I think one of the great levers or strategic imperatives that we've had sort of navigating this space is that we don't see esports as an end of itself, but rather a means to help support something else, and that something else being our main product, our main real life racing. So what that has enabled us to do is actually use esports really creatively and really flexibly to help us reach our objectives, whether that be reaching out to a younger audience, reaching a larger audience, or, just simply breaking down barriers into our sport, which, as a sport, motorsports does not have the same levels of accessibility as, say, a football or a tennis, where you can pick up a tennis racket or play with a football with your mates in a local park. So it's a much more holistic way of navigating the space. And I think that in large part has been a big reason as to why we've seen a lot of success in developing our expertise in this space.
Now, I've been involved in Formula One for all my career of 35 years. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that I still refer to, I'm afraid, Julian, as the television audience. I know it's a rather broader audience these days than just that. But anyway, for old-fashioned sake, I'll still refer to it as a television audience. So as a television audience has to some extent aged, and I think there's no doubt about that. There's been a slightly aging aspect to the Formula One broadcast audience. The opportunity afforded by esports is probably quite profound, because the demographic that you're appealing to is very different indeed from what would be the traditional Formula One broadcast audience.
Very much so. I mean, I'll share a stat that really resonated with me. 80% of our participants and viewers within our esports initiatives are below the age of 35. And when you compare that to traditional F1, it's a much, much higher ratio or statistic. So, it's definitely helping us reach a younger audience. And it's important because, you only have to look at the hours spent between, people below the age of 35 on gaming and people above the age of 35, say, on TV, and know that there will be a generational shift in the years to come. The younger demographic, whether that be the Gen Zs or the Gen Alphas or the millennials, they're spending more and more time gaming. And that's just a reality of the entertainment industry. And as a consequence of that, as a sport looking towards, building the longevity and health of their fan base, it's really important that we play where the opportunity areas are. And within gaming and esports, this is certainly a great opportunity area for us. So it helps us really create a product that we can sort of speak to our audiences, our younger audiences, in a language that they understand, right? It helps provide that additional touch points for them into the world of F1. If we didn't have that, then, that would be an opportunity missed. So, we're hoping that with esports, with gaming, it's part of a wider strategy, whether that also be sort of our opening up of content on social media, our tone of voice on our different social media platforms to kind of drive engagement. All of that sort of feeds into that goal of building our pipeline of fans into Formula One so that we can secure the longevity of what is an amazing, amazing sport.
Now, with 80% of your audience under the age of 35, Julian, you must be almost rugby tackled by sponsors whenever you turn up at meetings, because you're surely playing to such a key demographic for so many of the companies involved in Formula One, both as sponsors of the World Championship, but also individual team sponsors. So I'm assuming the commercial opportunity here is extremely exciting. It
really is. And I think that as esports continues to develop and become, quote unquote, more mainstream, which, this year in particular has been a huge eye opener for, I think, a lot of people in the industry, and the potential and role that esports can and should play in the wider entertainment landscape. I think you'll start to see a bigger imperative from brands wanting to understand the space a little bit more and see how they can tap into this opportunity area. I think what's really exciting is that we're already seeing that what traditionally was, mainly occupied by more endemic brands within esports, you're starting to see more non-endemic brands, more lifestyle brands coming into this space. The beauty about esports is that it is such a diversified space. The opportunities are so rich. And yeah, I think the conversations that we've had has certainly accelerated this year. More and more there's just so much more interest and awareness of the possibilities within esports, and particularly for us at Formula One, where esports, as I said, is not just a means of creating racing entertainment, which it is, but it also provides new opportunities, whether that be, our esports drivers turning from gamer to becoming a real life racer, for example, or, providing a completely immersive experience to our fans to kind of engage with our sport that, it lacks that kind of accessibility in terms of participation.
Now, tell me this, Julian, when the Australian Grand Prix was cancelled at the last moment, and the Formula One season suddenly had the pause button pressed on it, did you suddenly find yourself called into a meeting with Chase Carey? Julian, please put on a virtual World Championship. The pivoting online that took place in Formula One was actually every bit as impressive as subsequently Formula One's ability to put on a real World Championship starting in July during the middle of this pandemic. I mean, talk to us through what happened in the spring of this year, because it looked like a very powerful delivery of an online entertainment platform, which, seemed built for this time, really.
So it all really started, I want to say, towards the end of January, when we first got indications from the Chinese promoter that the Shanghai Grand Prix had to be postponed. So we moved very, very quickly. We saw the opportunity, actually, very, very quickly, to use our capabilities within esports to see what we could do in this space, because it offers us that flexibility and that scalability. So when that news came out, actually everyone, all of the teams mobilized to put together a concept where we would replicate the Chinese Grand Prix, but actually do that here from London. Before, I think a few weeks later, it was just a matter of weeks, we found, like you say, we found ourselves in Melbourne, and on the Friday, and the Australian Grand Prix was cancelled. And soon after that, a slew of other Grand Prix were announced that they would be either postponed or cancelled. So we had plans for the Chinese Grand Prix, but they weren't scalable plans because it was designed specifically for a single weekend use. So, we pulled together the concept of the virtual Grand Prix, as, everyone has seen now, sort of in a matter of 5 days. There were 5 extremely, extremely busy days, as you can imagine. But we moved incredibly fast to create something that was scalable and something that we would be able to kind of put on week. At the very core of it, we wanted to put on the virtual Grand Prix because there was almost like a responsibility, I suppose, to our fans. We tailored our product to the core competencies that we had. We used the opportunities that we had with our F1 drivers, past and present F1 drivers, and up-and-coming racing drivers as well, because I think there was a wider appreciation that our fans wanted to see our F1 drivers race. And if they can't see them race in the real world, then, they would still want to watch them race in a different kind of way. And so we managed to pull it together and help keep the lights on at F1 and deliver content to our fans that they could engage with sports sort of playing that role of, providing a little bit of escape, a little bit of relief. We felt that the virtual Grand Prix that we put together helped to serve that for our fans.
How beneficial is it to you, Julian, having drivers of the likes of Lando Norris and George Russell and Charles Leclerc not only willing to come on board the virtual Grand Prix series, but, clearly enjoying every moment of their esports lives, really?
Yeah, I think we're extremely lucky to have such a great crop of drivers more generally, but in particular with the new generation that's coming up. I think that one of the challenges we have as a sport at Formula One is that we don't necessarily have the same opportunities as other sports to really show the personalities and characters of our heroes, of our stars, because, when they're competing behind a racing helmet or behind a visor. So with gaming and esports, we've really been able to unmask our drivers, and they have such terrific personalities that, we were seeing so many more new fans coming into Formula One because of the things that they're doing on Twitch or streaming their lives on Twitch. Over the virtual Grand Prix, I will always remember an extremely, funny moment where, Charles was actually streaming his life on Twitch at that point. and his girlfriend actually was locked out of the apartment. And she couldn't get hold of Charles because, he was streaming, he was interacting with his audience, and she had to subscribe to Twitch, set up an account on Twitch and subscribe to his channel in order to just kind of message Charles, "Hey, I'm outside. Can you open up the apartment for me?" And I think that was such a genuine moment and so funny. It really, engaged a lot of our audiences. I think as our drivers have found over the course of lockdown through gaming and esports as well, they've also sort of rekindled their friendship. I think that Charles, Alex, George, they were very close growing up, but because of the commitments of the sport and because of their wider schedules, they drifted apart. And I remember during one of the virtual Grand Prix when we interviewed Charles, he actually said something really, really heartwarming. He said that it was through the virtual Grand Prix that he was able to rekindle his relationship with Alex and George. And I just felt that was such a heartwarming moment. And, I think if you put everything aside, you put the numbers aside, to rekindle such a meaningful relationship between the drivers was just such a terrific moment.
I'm going to ask you to polish the dust off your crystal ball and look into the future, perhaps as far as 10 years from now. Where is esports going? Can we see a continued integration of real and virtual sports to the extent that it essentially becomes a seamless, fully integrated experience for Formula One fans and gamers alike?
Terrific question. I think there's so many opportunities that we can continue to explore, whether that is, continuing to develop grassroots opportunities into Formula One, to, driver development, to talent searching. And, I think there's just so much that we can do for the good of the wider sport. And I think that the real opportunity for us is to continue to use esports in the way that is meaningful for us, to have the courage to take a path that maybe hasn't necessarily been fully developed. I think one amazing example that I can think of just very recently is how Epic Games, for example, took Fortnite and had a massive concert within a Travis Scott concert within the game itself. And that blurring of lines between gaming and music and just wider entertainment, I think is symbolic of the direction that, the wider entertainment industry is going. And sports will play a huge part in that evolution.
Well, I found that really fascinating, Jonathan, talking to him, because Julian is painting a picture there where Formula One is going to continue to see esports evolve as a key pillar of its business. And, the fact that he finished by talking about how games like Fortnite are integrating, real concerts into the virtual world, you can imagine in the future there's going to be such a rich opportunity for Formula One to merge real and virtual in really amazing ways. I mean, can you imagine Lewis Hamilton, winning a Grand Prix and stepping out of the car and appearing on a press conference? It's also being streamed to gamers who've been actually competing in the same Grand Prix, virtually. I mean, just the mind boggles at the opportunities that are going to develop. So for me, people like Julian, and he's a young guy. I mean, he's going to be leading the way in Formula One, I think, for quite a while. And it's going to be fascinating to see what develops.
And it all makes perfect sense, doesn't it, really? I mean, Formula One and motorsport embracing digital, it's the obvious way, isn't it, really, that the sport uses the simulator as an essential tool for drivers to learn tracks, the engineers to develop the car, test strategies and so on. And also, feeding off that, we had the chance to talk to a rising star of this world, Lando Norris, and you can understand how the synergy makes even more sense because he loves gaming, he loves karting, and a motor racing sim brings those two worlds together like a magnet. And as Lando has been telling me, it's been that way and probably always will be that way from a young age for him.
I would say gaming came first. I mean, when I was 4-5 years old, I was playing on the PlayStation on Gran Turismo. And I guess that's where I got my first taste of racing and driving and trying to drive a car quickly. That obviously then fed into karting and my passion for actual racing. They kind of went hand in hand, I guess. Karting is the real thing. So there's nothing better than the real thing itself. And karting, you learn a lot about racecraft and how to extract things from yourself and push yourself to the limit. And then the sim racing and the gaming is, again, you're racing against people virtually. but you can explore more things. You can race on cars, and you can race in different formulas, different categories. You can learn about setting up a car or different cars. There's more like of a technical thing you can learn from driving on a game, but there's nothing more real than learning about your racecraft and yourself than on the actual racetrack. Yeah.
As your racing career progressed, for real, as you might say, on a real racing track, in real karts, cars and so on, how much gaming did you continue to do? Was that just a little sideline or something you actually kept going because you loved it so much?
I mean, I do it because I love it. I don't do it because I have to, So I do it because I love it, and it's very enjoyable. And it's not just from the gaming side, it's not just driving that I do. I play a lot of different games because I love doing it, and I'm playing with my friends and we have a good time. But I guess from the driving side of it, I was still doing it because it's still very handy, and there's a lot of things you can do, especially in categories where you can't go and do testing every single day or every week or every month. Sometimes you have to resort back to the simulator, and if there's sometimes things I need to work on for the next weekend or the next race, and you can't go and do the test, then I would resort to the simulator, and I would go and practice a certain technique that I might not be doing so well on, or some certain corners that I struggle with or something like that. Then I can do that all on simulator, go back to the racetrack the next week and try and put that practice from the simulator into the actual thing. So although it wasn't something you have to do, it may not always be the most realistic thing. The fact you're trying it at least, and you're trying to get your head around it and practice that kind of thing, it still comes in very handy. So I guess you don't have to, but it's still something that I believe helped me in my driving.
And what about the crossover then between virtual and real? How helpful are they? Particularly virtual for real, I suppose. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing. I think it's very handy for different things. There's a lot of different things you can extract from using a simulator and playing online. I guess one of probably the most advantageous things is learning about the knowledge of how the car works. So the aerodynamics, the setup, working with your engineers. Because a Formula One car is so hard to replicate on a simulator. And as good as they are, nothing comes close to driving a Formula One car because they're so quick. Physically, it's so difficult. You can't feel the G-force. You don't have the fear. You just don't get that exact feeling. So that's the thing, maybe that's not as accurate, and you maybe struggle with a little bit more. But the fact of working on the setup with your engineers and your driving techniques and trying things and expanding your vocabulary of how to set up a race car and different setups and how the aerodynamics work and things like that, then that's perfect for a simulator.
Was it a no-brainer then to take part in the F1 eSports series, the virtual Grand Prix series during lockdown? All your mates were there, George Russell.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just like, come on then, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot more for fun, There's two different sides of the online stuff. You can take it seriously, or you can just do it for fun. And you can do it where you just go in and you make the setup as quick as possible, but you don't think about learning so much from it. But you can do it because of the enjoyment of it, and it's just very fun. You're playing with your mates, and you want to be competitive and beat other people. But then you can do it where you go on and you actually take interest and learn from the things you're doing. And you have an engineer sitting beside you and goes, well, on the racetrack last week, we did this. Let's try it again on the simulator and see how it correlates and how it changes. Maybe I try and set up a car and think, okay, so if the car is doing this, this is what I would change. And then you can kind of learn how to set up a car in some ways yourself. So you can take the two aspects of online is fun and work and learning from it. And I guess I do both of them.
But I bet you were competitive in the series, weren't you? You didn't enjoy that George Russell won, did you?
No, I mean, he was very good in it, to be honest. He spent a lot of time on it, and I didn't. I was streaming and playing different games a lot more often. So yeah, fair play to him. But no, it was just for a lot of fun. It wasn't a proper serious competition. It was something to get us through lockdown and entertain viewers who can't go and watch Formula One. And that was the main aspect of it.
What about the social media interaction? How much did you enjoy that? Because you've got a huge following and you're always doing stuff. And that seems almost part of a driver's role in 2020. Esteban Gutierrez, who we spoke to in the last episode, was saying he loves it. That's really instant feedback and it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been doing for a few years, really, like the Twitch and the streaming side of things. It's something I already started like three years ago, before I was ever in Formula One or thought I could be in Formula One. So that was a lot more for fun and just kind of giving fans a bit more behind the scenes, something that no other driver did. I was the first driver to do it. So it was something that I thought would be good and I really enjoyed. Again, not something I have to do. I can stop doing it right now if I want to. But it's something which is easy and fun, and you're interacting with your fans, you're giving them something or an experience that they never really had before, which is really cool for them. So it's something I enjoy doing. It feels part of what I do. It's very easy to do. A lot of my fans love it, which is awesome. So it's kind of a win-win. It's something that's fun, enjoyable, and fans love it.
How long do you think before we're going to see gamers able to participate real time against, say, live data from a Grand Prix, for example?
I don't know. I think that's. I think that's still. Yes, I think it's possible, probably, but I don't know. I haven't seen anything like be done for that kind of thing. I don't know. It probably isn't far away from someone being able to do it, but I don't know. I think it's something that will happen in the future. It's probably inevitable, but at the same time, probably takes a lot of setting up and a lot of work and effort to be able to create something like that. So we'll see. I'm sure it's not too many years or not too far in the future away.
What do you see as the next steps then for esports? I mean, you're right in the middle of that demographic. 80% of gamers are under 35. You're at the lower end of that bit, or maybe in the middle, depending on how old you are, if you're under 35. But do you know what I mean? What's next, do you think, for esports? What would you like to see, for example?
I'm not sure. I think, from the racing side of things, you're seeing more and more people from driving and esports in terms of sim racing translate their sim skills into getting a real drive, in a proper race team and traveling around the world. And you're seeing more and more competitions like McLaren Shadow competition, where we're giving these opportunities to people who can't afford to go and do actual racing, to translate their skills from a sim driving professional into an actual race car professional. So I think we're seeing more and more of that, and the more we see it, the more I think it will grow and more people would get into it, and it'll grow and it kind of go on from there. So from the racing side of things, I think that's how it needs to grow and continue to improve, is seeing more people translate from sim racing into actual race cars. From other games, I'm not too sure. I think it's by getting more and more people of the best around the world coming together to see who is that single best, or which team is that best in the world. So, but I think there's already competitions which are huge, for millions and millions of pounds, thousands and thousands, or hundreds of thousands of spectators and so on. So I think it's very big already. It will continue to grow.
What do you think of the gamer turned racer, the fashion for that? People making it from...
I think it's really good.
Cockpit.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I support it. I help out with the McLaren Shadow stuff when I can, and I love seeing it. I love seeing people who, maybe can't afford to go and do actual racing, but have these skills and has the talent to go and do something like that, and go from something very small at home, like a lot of people can do, to going and achieving something much, much bigger. And I support that, because I've been fortunate not to be in that situation where sim racing is all I can do. I've been fortunate to go and actually do karting and Formula 3 and Formula 4 and so on. But I love sim racing, and I know that if you love sim racing, you probably love real racing too, when you want to get the opportunity to go and drive a real car. And therefore I support that attribute and that curve of going from a sim to a real race car is a dream for so many people. And that's why I love it, and will continue to support that kind of effect into the future.
One other thought, how much are you enjoying Formula One? Because you always seem so positive. There's a smile. And that's just not blowing smoke. You just sort of watch you around, and you're just like, you're living the dream. I mean, given what you've just said, how you like to encourage people, it seems you know what it's like to be in that sort of wonderful, hallowed paddock of Formula One.
I mean, it's amazing. It's something I've always dreamed of doing, and thousands of people dream of doing. So I don't take it for granted, but at the same time, it's not all smiles. I go through a lot of tough times and difficulties, and it's not as amazing as it is, and I would stand by that forever. There's a lot of tough times that people don't see just because it's not on TV, and I don't put it on social media and so on. But it's not easy at all to do everything that we do. But the bonuses of being able to be part of McLaren and drive a McLaren and fly around the world is what everyone sees and what everyone kind of wants to show the world, and everyone's perspective of a Formula One driver is. But there's a lot of things behind the scenes that people don't see. The days away, the days traveling, the sacrifices you made to get to Formula One in the first place. So it is glorious and it's amazing and it's a dream job in so many ways, but no one sees the difficulties of doing it and the sacrifices you have to make and the struggles of it all. So I don't know. I'm just very happy. I love my job. I love working with the people I work with, putting smiles on their faces, and yeah, I guess that's what motivates me.
One final thought, which would make your life so much happier, I suppose, in one way, is that if you were successful in terms of winning a race and then becoming a champion, how long do you think before, just the final thought, that McLaren can rejoin the battle at the front of the grid?
I mean, 2022 is our best opportunity. I don't think anything this year or 2021 will continue to work against that or towards that. But 2022 with the new regulations is, our best opportunity for years and years. Best opportunity for any team to get to the front, but of course we're hoping it's us more than anyone. That's our time to try and make the biggest or have the biggest impact, make that biggest difference. It takes time. Formula One, it's not easy at all. It takes years and years. So hopefully in the not too distant future, I can or we can as a team return to doing what we once did.
He seems to be a very impressive young man, feet on the ground, taking nothing for granted. And over the weekend, he had to contend with the fact that his McLaren car didn't perform as he wanted, because at one stage he was running very healthily, looking on track for a podium at the Eiffel Grand Prix. And also very much the millennial driver, as you might say, talking about being active on social media, enjoying it, doing the gaming. And also, and this is an interesting point as well, keen to help gamers become racers, which many Formula One purists might think, come on, it's just not the same. But he, I thought, was very eloquent and articulate about explaining how those worlds do meet. But even so, however much he enjoys playing in the virtual world, there is nothing which beats actual racing for real.
Yeah, he made so many good points, I thought, Jonathan. And as you say, he very eloquently described that relevance of gaming and simulators to the real world of Formula One, whilst admitting that there's nothing quite like driving an actual Formula One car, which of course we would fully expect. But I think the Lando Norris interview, hopefully, to any of the skeptics out there who think that eSports is not for them, or at least if it's not for them, it shouldn't be for the sport. Actually, it very much is for the sport, because it's bringing along that whole new demographic. And when you hear Julian talking about the fact that 80% of gamers are under the age of 35, I mean, I know from my own family, my kids don't watch TV, and yet you offer them a gaming opportunity and they'll happily participate in it. So we've got a generation coming through who don't want to observe a sport. They actually want to participate in it. And how good is that? And I think the diversity of people who can come into a sport through esports is great. It's very democratic. You don't need to be a rich person. And again, something that Lando, acknowledged. He's been very fortuitous in terms of the life that he's had and the ability that he's had to develop a racing career with all of the expense that goes along with that. So yeah, he's been great. And I love watching the interaction between Lando and George Russell and Alex Albon and Charles Leclerc, and how they're bonding, through the virtual environment much more than they do in the real world. Because as you and I know, Jonathan, in the real world, the drivers go from their motorhome to their garage to their press conferences to their sponsor appearances. And very often they don't get much of a chance to interact. Whereas with the online gaming environment, they're interacting with each other all the time and clearly enjoying every moment of it. So I think it's such a great opportunity for our sport. It's a very exciting one. Couldn't have come along at a better time when I think many of us were beginning to worry about the fact that Formula One in the future might not appeal to younger audiences anymore. And I think this is part of the answer to that problem.
No, I can only agree. Absolutely. Same in the Ledyard household in terms of gaming and interest in Formula One and the crossover, and the fact that this has been a real brand leader in terms of sport and continuing where so many other sports and activities have closed down. Formula One found a way to continue through lockdown with, as you say, the virtual series, and then for real as well. So if the two can emerge unscathed and actually even stronger for this 2020 into 2021, so much the better. Now, in contrast to that, I'm tempted to say, we have a special episode of At the Controls for November, which some might say is quite old school in the sense that we're going to be talking to the Mercedes technical director, James Allison, no less. And he has a very special guest too, which you need to tell us about, Mark.
Yes, we have none other than Chris Papaioannou, who is the commanding officer of Strike, which is part of the Naval Aviation Warfare Development Center for the United States Navy. And this is better known, I think, to all of us as Top Gun. So we have Chris from Top Gun essentially joining James Allison to compare notes on high-performance racing, high-performance flying, technologies, people doing amazing things, and sharing their mutual passions because, as it turns out, Jonathan, James is a passionate flyer. That's his hobby. And Chris absolutely loves Formula One. So we're going to have the two of them in conversation. It's The Need for Speed, supercharged by Mercedes-Benz.
Starring Maverick, Mark Gallagher. Thank you very much for listening. Remember to rate and review, subscribe and spread the word. We're really looking forward to November, but I hope you've enjoyed this October edition, and we'll speak again next month.